be with Andre and I. This is kind of a session that Andre initially came up with, and he invited me to join or present with him. So I'm excited to do that. But it's on common security mistakes and how to avoid them. Between Andre and myself, we see a lot of different customers doing a lot of different things that could potentially cause them issues down the road. And so we wanted to put a session together to kind of guide people in the right direction and kind of show what mistakes are out there, and then obviously what you can do to avoid those and address them. So I'll go ahead quickly here and introduce myself. My name is Alex Meyer. I'm Director of Dynamics and F&O, Dynamics AX and F&O development at FastPath. My contact information is there in the middle. Andre and myself are both Microsoft MVPs. We both have blogs where we post information about them, about security and stuff that we find, and just trying to give back to the community a little bit. I also have a security class that I put together if you're interested. Obviously, I've presented a number of different sessions before in the past as well. So with that, I'll hand it over to Andre to introduce himself.
Thank you, Alex. Well, my name is Arnaud de Calavon. The majority of you might know me from the Dynamics community, where I do quite a lot of answering questions on the forums. In my business life, I'm product manager at To Increase, managing some of our horizontal products. If you want to reach out to me, have any questions, you can use the email provided, or also reach out and learn from some topics on my blog page. Just like Alex mentioned, awarded as MVP, for me it was in October 2013. Actually, I'm working with AX product for the last 20 years. On Dynamics 365 finance operations particularly, it's around 7+ years. Also had some early preview and testing together also with Microsoft. Like mentioned, I'm a community contributor on the Dynamics community. I also do some blog posts now and then, and just like today, I like to present and share my knowledge. Then today we will talk about some of the security mistakes we see, and actually we will also want to do a kind of dialogue demo to check and then showcase what can go wrong. So
yeah.
But we have a kind of disclaimer here.
Right. We did want to make sure that we put up a warning to make sure the following demo or scenario that we're going to set up should not be reenacted by anybody without the supervision of professionals, because we're going to make numerous mistakes in here. So what we'll do is we'll set this up. Andre and I will kind of go back and forth here, but let me go ahead and pull up, and we'll set the scenario as in an office far away, with a customer using F&O. I'm going to pretend that I am going about my day-to-day, and I'll let Andre kick it off here.
Okay. Hi, Alex. How's it going?
Oh, it's going all right. I need to fulfill a security request from upper management here. Apparently, one of our users cannot perform what they need to as far as setting up vendor bank accounts. So, I don't have time to go in and actually figure out what security she actually needs. So I'm actually just going to go in and give her sysadmin, I think.
What? Isn't there a lower privilege role you could maybe assign to her instead of that system administrator role?
There probably is, but I'm not sure how to find it, and we're under crunch time right now. So to be 100% honest, we really didn't test our business processes from a security perspective before going live. We just ran out of time. So I don't know how to easily find that.
Where does the request come from? Did they submit a support request, or did you get any approval for the change?
They were supposed to submit a support request, but upper management is just breathing down my neck. I need to get this done. They gave me a Post-it note with the request on it, and I'm just trying to fill the request right now.
Just out of curiosity, did we customize the roles before assigning them to the users?
Aren't the roles from Microsoft or we're just using the rules from Microsoft, aren't they correct?
Well, wouldn't customizing access for each business process be a better approach since security and user licensing are tied together? Well, we could save a lot of money as well, I guess.
Yeah, you're probably right. I'm not sure.
Wait, wait. What environment are you making these security changes? Shouldn't we go through the normal testing first?
This user really needs to get these vendor bank accounts modified and out the door so that we can, be getting paid. I'm going to just make the change directly in production. We don't have time to go through our normal testing.
And didn't she had access to this before? What happened here?
She did. I think if I remember correctly, we don't keep change tickets, but I think we modified the vendor bank account form, and we didn't have time to test the customization.
So we did change, but did not look at the custom security related to that. Well, and we didn't do any testing here.
No, yeah, we didn't create custom security. I know we didn't, but we did test. But I think, if I remember correctly, that the user was assigned sysadmin when they were testing. I think I just need to assign this security, and I'll come back later and change it. Don't worry. So I'll go ahead and actually assign it. So while I'm doing this, we'll actually assign this system administrator, there it is, to this user. Now we're going to skip forward a little bit here and pretend like we're going through the next audit cycle for this particular company. Hey, Andre, I need your help, seriously.
Hey, Alex, what's up?
Our internal audit review is coming up, and they want all of our system administrators out of the system and what they've done with their access. And I think we have too many sysadmins, to be honest.
We don't have support tickets for all of our sysadmin requests here.
Well, we have some, but we don't create a ticket request every time. I don't know if you remember that Alicia user that you asked about earlier, but so I'm gonna have to go through emails and post-it notes and try to remember them all.
Okay, and don't we do periodic reviews of assigned user access?
Yeah, we do periodic reviews, but unfortunately, I think a lot of the managers and business process owners just blindly approve them. So
No. Well, sure, it sounds like we have a lot of plenty security mistakes done over here.
yes,
Does it
I
sound
agree.
familiar to you?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. Can we use the show of hands function? How many in Teams? How many people does this sound familiar for this scenario of this kind? Or um, and how many security mistakes did you catch throughout this? Because there were quite a few of them. So hopefully, yeah, I'm seeing some hands coming up now. I appreciate that. Hopefully this scenario doesn't sound too familiar, but if it does, let's walk through some of uh, the different mistakes that were made throughout this. And we'll kind of walk through what they were and then what we can do to address those. So first and foremost, the first mistake that we normally see is this idea of utilizing out-of-the-box security, right? So you may have caught during our monologue there where we talked about the fact that we didn't modify out-of-the-box security for Microsoft. That's just what we used. And there's a couple different there's pros and cons to this concept, right? The first one being that it's easy and it's fast to use the out-of-the-box security from Microsoft, right? Because it's already there. But there are a number of different cons, and one of them is that the out-of-the-box security roles from Microsoft were developed from a functional standpoint. So Microsoft went in and said, what is everything that this user is going to need access to? Gave you access to all the bells and whistles and extra features that a user probably doesn't need access to for their day-to-day operations. And in many cases, just assigning those out-of-the-box roles are going to lead to users being over-provisioned. simply because of that extra security that Microsoft is providing from that functional standpoint, which is going to lead to more SOD risks or segregation of duties risks, or even just plain risk to your organization from a financial standpoint, as well as higher licensing costs because, like Andre mentioned, your security is tied directly to licensing, right? So what your users assigned is going to dictate how much they're going to cost from a licensing standpoint. So in a perfect world, right, we would have this idea of creating what we call least privilege security to fix this, which is where you assign the least amount of access to the user that they actually need to perform their day-to-day operations. And we actually have a slide coming up here where we'll address this or talk about this a little bit more. So mistake number two is kind of leading off of mistake number one. Is this idea that user access is going to be over provisioned, right? And this tends to happen for any number of reasons. Some of them that we've seen so far, or that we've seen, have been things around like can't figure out security, right? Because security in AX is hard. That's not shouldn't be a news to anybody. But security is not something that is extremely easy in Dynamics AX and FNO. And so because of that, it leads to a lot of users getting frustrated or just not knowing what the different features and functionality are around security. And so because of that, they tend to over provision security to the user and give them more access than they need. Uh, just like in the scenario we just went through, right? If a user can't perform the process that they need to perform their day-to-day operations, especially if it's costing the company money from a user not being able to, change a vendor bank account or go in and post orders or things like that. Um, Within business, right, your time equals money. So the longer this user doesn't have this access, the more money it's costing the business. And so you'll get a statement like the following that says, give them the access that they need, right? So the idea here, from the scenario above, right, is, it's over my head. Somebody from upper management or somebody above me has said, give them the access. I don't really have the say to, go in and override them, and so I have to give them the access to have them get the orders out the door. Um, and so this leads to, like, again, in our scenario that we went through, the over assignment of the sysadmin role, right? Because if you assign sysadmin to the user, they're going to be able to do everything in the system that they need. But just like in the scenario we talked about, this is going to be the first report that auditors are going to ask for, right? They're going to ask for how many sysadmins do you have and what are they doing with that access, right? And so you want to be able to quickly generate those two reports. And obviously, the fewer number of sysadmins you have, the less of an impact that's going to have as far as the amount of time and effort you have to put in for your internal external audits from that perspective.
It's not only about granting access to just the normal business users. Also, I was in a global rollout where they had to roll out Dynamics across the globe. And at that time, a lot of consultants, people from support were involved as well. And they all got access as a system administrator. All business users were correct, but the list with system administrators over here was still 56. Really insane.
Yeah. Yeah, 56 is too much. I'm going to put that out there. I think we can all agree that that's too many. So there isn't a set number that I would say, but less than 56, I think, is fairly
Oh, well,
fairly
I would
easy to
prefer
say.
only one, but
Right. In a perfect world, you'd have one. But all right, so we talked about that idea of the least privilege security in the previous slide. And again, the idea of least privilege is that you want to assign a user exactly what they need to perform their day-to-day operations, right? So it's the least amount of access that that user would actually need. Obviously, there are several benefits to this. It's going to stop the user from either intentionally or inadvertently making changes to the environment that they shouldn't, right? A lot of the times it's going to be inadvertent, right? That the user is not going to know what them changing a particular setting or parameters that it has, a larger impact than they're probably aware of. But also the intentional side where somebody goes in and is going to use their access to, try and commit some sort of fraud against your organization. Like we mentioned earlier, it's going to help eliminate user segregation of duties conflicts, especially if you're a publicly traded company in the U.S. or if you have other auditory regulations in other countries as well. Um, and you're also going to remove some of the cost of actually having to provide a process controller mitigation around that as well. So obviously, if you take the number of SOD risks down, you're going to take down the time and effort from actually mitigating those SOD risks as well. And then a big one that a lot of companies that, at least that I deal with at FastPath, and I'm sure Andre does as well, is this idea that licensing is tied directly to security, right? What a user is assigned is actually, as far as security goes, is actually going to dictate how much they're going to cost from a user licensing perspective. So it's not actually what a user does, it's what the user is assigned or what they could do. And so, changing security can have a ripple effect down to if you make one small change in a privilege, right, that could propagate down into a number of different users. And so you want to make sure that you are going about your security development and keeping that in mind as you're going through it. um, Obviously there are, the idea of least privilege, there are some cons to it. It's going to take longer, right, than using just the out of the box roles, right, because the out of the box roles are already there. With least privilege, right, you have to design your security from the bottom up basically, and be going through and saying, what does this user actually need access to, defining your business processes, going out and developing your privileges, your duties, your roles, from a least privilege perspective. So it is going to take longer. And so what we normally see customers do is that they have a balance between this least privilege and the least effort, right? The least effort being, obviously using something like out of the box security, or combining out of the box security to create custom security, however they're doing it. And then least privilege is going about the way that we just talked about. Another thing that I'll add here is that there are different design approaches, right? So when we go into a customer, right, there are a lot of times we bring up this idea of least privilege security, and they go, "Yeah, there's no way we can do that. That's we have our operation's too big. We just don't have the budget or the time to do it." And that's where you can have this idea of taking a hybrid approach, right? Where you have some areas of your system where you're utilizing least privilege security around your high risk areas. So, where you actually would have a financial risk if a user had too much access. And then in your other areas of the system where, maybe you don't care if the user has too much access, right? Maybe use out of the box security there. So the idea, or the scenario that I normally give, is that you may not care if a user can change a vendor birthday, but you will care if they can change a vendor bank account, right? Or you would care if they could actually, impact the GL, or any other sort of transactional table, right? So you want to make sure that you have those high risk areas kind of secured down, but your other areas of your system, right, you could use the out of the box security from Microsoft. All right. All right. Mistake number 4 is getting tunnel vision during the security design. So there's actually a couple different ideas here, but the idea is that you're so focused, I guess, on getting the users the security they need that you forget about the other things that security can impact. And so again, we're coming back to this idea of designing your security without SOD or process control consideration, right? If you're going in and just saying this is what this user needs, and you're not thinking about the segregation duties or the process controls around those that you need, at the end of the day, especially if you have, again, those auditory regulations to meet, it's going to be very difficult to try to wind that back, or try to revamp some of that security design, right? So one of the things we talk about here is the idea of the user versus position security design. And what I mean by that is designing the security for a particular user instead of designing it for the position or the employment that they have, right? So designing it for this Alicia user, let's say, instead of the AP clerk that she actually is within the organization. So you want to make sure that you are designing for the position instead of a user, because that way you can reuse that security. If you're designing it for the user, it's very particular that if that user were to leave the organization, it's very difficult to come back and apply that again to the next user. One thing to keep in mind with this is that every environment is going to have SOD risks. It's not really feasible to get to zero risk because you're either going to run out of any number of resources, either time, money, or actual people within your organization, unless you're a super large, multinational organization and you have people within your organization that can do each specific task. There's going to be SOD risk in your organization. The idea is that you want to minimize your SOD risks and then blend those ideas of security, right, of minimizing the risks, and then your process controls or mitigations around those. So you want to make sure you have both of those designed. And then again, we just to drive home the point is that your licensing considerations, right? It's very common to see that users go in and design security without the idea that there's any sort of license implications behind the scenes. And so by actually taking and looking at the license impact of a particular security change, you're going to be able to save your company money. And so there's large amounts of ROI that you can get by just looking at where you can save your organization money from looking at licensing costs and trying to minimize those. As again, just to give an anecdotal example, at FastPath, we have customers that are using the licensing reports, and they're able to save themselves, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars by just looking at where can they simplify their security, or where can they reduce that footprint that they have from a security standpoint, and therefore save themselves money from licensing. All right. We also went through the mistake number 5 here. You may have heard Andre had a big head slap when I was making security changes directly in production. That's obviously one of the things that we see quite often is this idea that you're deploying your security without following any ALM process. And this gets into the idea of treating your security as code. If you treat your security as code, then it's much easier to kind of get in the mindset of actually following an ALM process, where you're actually going in and designing your security in a development environment, then promoting it throughout the other environments, instead of going in and making your changes in a dev, then making those same changes in test, and then making those same changes in production, right? So you want to make sure that you have this in mind, that you're going to a development environment, and then it's going to be promoted throughout the different the other environments that you have as it works its way up the chain. Just like your code would go through those environments, your security should be going through those same environments as well. And if you need help with this ALM process, there's tons of Microsoft resources around the ALM process. Joris from Microsoft does a great job of getting blogs and other documentation put up as far as what the ALM process from Microsoft looks like, or what they recommend, and then how to kind of meet those particular needs there. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it off to Andre here to go through the rest of the mistakes that we kind of defined.
Yeah, thank you. Well, one of the mistakes, also already a bit touched in the first dialogue, no period access reviews performed. If you're running your business, people might come and go. So your security is not static, it's always changing. If you have new employees, or probably also some vacation replacements, so stand-in users, probably you will hire some persons on a contract basis. People are still there when they got terminated. Actually, at one of the customers, we did create a script looking at the Active Directory status. At that time, it was AX 2012, and just periodically disabled persons which were not there anymore. But also some position changes, people moving from one job to the other, then asking for new privileges, and you will forget about the old access rights. And if you don't have any segregation of duties in place, you will not get any notification of it, and probably one person will now be available to create a vendor also approve invoices, and also improve the vendor payments. And that's not something you would like to have in your company. So you for sure need to review the user assignments periodically. And furthermore, the reviews should not be owned by the IT, but it should be owned by the business process owners in your company.
Yeah, that's a really big point, Andre. That's one that we see quite often, is that security gets dumped into the lap of the managers or business process owners, or sorry, gets dumped into the IT sysadmin people, the teams there, instead of your managers, business process owners, right? You have this idea where your IT sysadmins have the ability to go in and make the changes to security, right? And have the access to do it, but have no idea what a user should actually be able to do within the system. Your managers and business process owners know what the users should be able to do, but may not have the knowledge or the rights to actually go in and make those changes. So you need to have communication between those two teams. And so if you just have IT doing your security reviews, you're not really doing a security review at that point, right? You're just having IT kind of sign some forms because they have no idea what that user should actually be doing. So that's a big piece to that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we see indeed a lot of companies where IT is only managed by IT, or the security only managed by IT, and some people are called in the project a kind of business process owner, but they don't take ownership, unfortunately.
Yeah, right.
They should define which processes and security should, or which access should be allowed for their users in different positions.
Right.
Another mistake, if you upgrade or from AX 2012 or AX 2009 or probably any other system you had before, don't copy the security you had in the past. Simply said, if you're implementing Microsoft Dynamics 365 today, the system is in fact completely different already compared to older versions, but it's also probably when you implement it, it will be another way of working. So during the upgrades, it's really easy. Well, we had before this and this, so it should be the same. And we have a recording what they did in the past. Please assign it. But if they had, for example, a system administrator in the past and they used all kind of things, it's not really logical to apply the same again. Probably also if you do the implementation also a bit different and look at things in another way, it's really unlikely that you have the same business processes, and if you don't have the same business processes, don't use the same security model. So that's one thing that we really want to encourage. If you do the upgrades or an implementation, really look at again what positions do you have, and look at really the security rules which are required, and then in that way just create a kind of blueprinting and create a better way for the security setup. Also, security is a low priority. That's also a mistake. A low priority means, well, we will focus only on the implementation part, test if everything is working, and just a few weeks before the go live, hey, we need some security rules. And then you're really too late. So during the implementation or upgrade or whatever, make sure, as it should be from the start of the project already, one of the topics of your complete project.
Yeah.
So that means when you take the time to do it correctly, you can also do the testing together with the business users already with their own security rules. Some pushback you often hear at the customer says, well, if we apply the security now, they can't do everything they need. Well, that's correct. That's why we test. Do you have everything that is really required for your daily task? Yes or no? That's one. And also they say, well, if we do have some tests with the user roles, we don't know if the functionality is working correctly or not. Well, if you have the correct implementation partner around you, for sure they will be able to identify if something which is going wrong, if it's caused by a security setup, or if it's caused by a setup in the system, or if there's another bug. So at least we would encourage you to really, from the start of the project, decide on what security roles to implement. Also, create them already, assign them to the user roles, to the users in the UAT and quality assurance testing.
And one thing just to add, Andre, here is the idea, security is a low priority because it doesn't give that immediate ROI, that return on investment, right? Because to the outside, it doesn't look like setting up security is really going to generate any income or any money for the organization, right? Getting different modules set up or different features set up, right? That's where you're actually going to be, your profit revenue streams are. But the one thing we want to keep in mind is that your user licensing and SOD is tied directly to security, right? So that's one way to sell it to upper management, or if you have a project manager or something like that that doesn't take security seriously, how you can get them on board is that, hey, we can save the company money and be able to give, money directly back and, save, our budget for this project by setting up security correctly.
That's correct. And now you're triggering one thing I remembered from the past. When I was doing an implementation in the Netherlands, that company had a request. We would like to have all people who are allowed to create and approve purchase orders to first review an incoming invoice. But at that time, they looked at the security roles and said, well, the security role for approving the invoices is an accounts payable manager. Accounts payable manager is enterprise level, so you would need all kind of enterprise level licenses. Well, actually, we looked at the number of users really needing that review. It was in total 125 users. Though we also looked at what is really the access level for approving the vendor invoice or reviewing it, and that was set to a self-service task. That was AX 2012.
Yeah.
So that means there's a huge difference between the licensing cost for the self-service and also for the enterprise user. But then I said, well, probably we can do it in a bit different way, but we need to find out also what would be the access for reviewing the document itself, because they need to be able to see the pending invoice, and also check again the purchase order. But that turned out to be a functional level. Mm-hmm. So, but there was a difference between, let's say, 1,200 for the enterprise and 300 for the functional. So that in total, we were able to save that company initially for licenses for about 250,000 euros. That's one. And in the meantime, they're already live for about 7 years, and they earned that money back again on saving, also on the enhancement fees.
Yeah. The money, the amount of money that's tied up in user licensing that you can save is quite large, especially in big larger organizations. So it's something that you need to definitely keep in mind. So,
but to be honest, there were also scenarios where I was not able to save that.
Right. Yeah.
That money.
You're not always going to.
It was really, we can't lower the menu item access from Microsoft. So
no.
Well, actually, it is possible, but it's not allowed.
Right.
So another common mistake, that if you install new updates from Microsoft for the continuous updates, but also ISV updates, they're also not reviewed on security impact. It can lead to all kinds of different errors in the system. If you look carefully, it might even change your license requirement or the level if you're an activity user or an operations user. it might change. If that's the case, just try to reach out to Microsoft and say, hey, we have an issue because we used to have activity users and now they're only that operations level. What's going on here? And Microsoft can actually explain to you or should explain to you what happened, and also admit if a mistake was made, yes or no. Also in AX 2012, they made one mistake by adding a new menu item on the system user role in the past. That menu item was set also as the operations level. That means that all users, instead of having the task and the functional, they were all a bit too much at that time. Created a security ticket for Microsoft, or no security, and a service ticket for Microsoft, and they admitted it and they changed it back. So but if something is changing, it might be the case that Microsoft is adding new features. And if you look at the new features, hey, it's nice. I want to give this to Alicia because she needs it. And then it might be the case if you add that new feature, that feature also requires a higher license. Also, what I've seen in the past, and that's also why you really need to do testing, could be probably also automated, but once I've seen that a menu item got replaced, and it was for the voucher transactions, usually the company over there did some manual testing. And when they went live, they said, well, I can't see any voucher transactions form anymore. What's wrong? Well, what's wrong? You didn't test. That's one thing. So that we indeed found out that a menu item was replaced, but we used the principle of least privilege over there. So we made also some custom rules and duties and privileges, and the custom privilege did not have, of course, the new menu item created by Microsoft. Also, you have to look carefully if you have some security on, for example, some dimensional fields on several forms, like the default dimensions on customers or sales orders. Sometimes Microsoft is changing the control properties, the needed permission. And if that's the case, then you might from day 1 to day 2 not have access anymore. Or if you didn't have access, then probably you do have access afterwards. So really, if Microsoft or ISVs are updating their software, also check impact on the security.
Correct. All right. Ooh, sorry.
Oh.
Let's go.
I think it was a quite important one, the mistake number 8. So I thought I had to do it again. But let's continue with number 10. That's good. Also, the implementation of security is often just underestimated about the complexity. Some people just think, well, we have a security role, we have the duty, we have the privilege, and then we have the menu item linked to that one. But if they are not able to talk more than only that menu item, the privilege, duty, and role, then they don't have the complete overview of what is really required to do certain exceptions. So be aware that a person implementing the security has really the proper knowledge and can advise you to utilize the best approaches on every roles. Also, if you look at the Dynamics 365, that's also in the list of the forgotten features here. The data entities are licensed or just granted separately from the forms. So if you want to have access to certain data entities for using, for example, the opening Excel, then you also have to grant access to privileges which has access to the data entities in the system. Mm-hmm. So a lot of features are forgotten by or customers who want to do it themselves, or even partners who were never interested in looking a bit beyond and above. So for example, the extensible data security, where you can do record-based security, hide certain records, or set some permissions which records are allowed to be changed by a user or not. That can be done using extensible data security. Both Alex and me did write about the extensible data security on our blogs, and on my blog you can also find some examples to get started, and also how to deal with some more complex scenarios, like securing access to the warehouses individually. We already touched the data entity permissions. Also the table permissions framework, and Alex also did write an excellent blog about that one, is forgotten. What is the table permissions framework? It's an additional layer of security where you can set some properties on really checking on the AOS level, and then from the AOS to the database. Do you really implicitly want to grant access on certain data, like sensitive data for bank accounts or credit cards fields? And sometimes when people create their own privileges, they just grant access to for example, the vendor table form. And when they test the role, they will get an error stating that they don't have access to the fields birth date or whatever. That's because of some of the fields of the vendor table, but also if you get a similar error in other tables or fields as well, there's a property AOS authorization, which requires an additional access on the table level, and in that case, on the privilege, you need to add also table and field permissions to allow access on it. Also, what's really forgotten a lot is that there's a support, and that was a bit changed in the Dynamics 365, which is more logical now. On the privilege level, for each menu item, you can also state, are users able to see future records, yes or no, current records, yes or no, and past records, yes or no. So that means that if you look at, for example, the human resources features in the system, they do have quite a lot usage of date effective tables. They can say or state a position is valid today or until what dates. You can set access individually to allow users to see current and past or future records or not. So probably you want to allow persons to create new positions for the future, but don't allow them to manage or change data for past positions in the system. And also just again, it was not this week, the week before that one, I was talking with the customer. Then we were searching for one of the standard batch jobs, which was called the automatic role assignment. It was not there anymore. So somewhere in the implementation, probably or at the start or later on, someone thought, well, let's clean up some batch jobs in the system which are not used. But it's quite cumbersome to get the automatic role assignment job back for sure if you don't know the name of the class used, because there's no user interface to actually start a new batch job again for the automatic role assignment. And for sure you don't want to go to each role and click on automatic role assignment manually in case there's a certain urgency to do it. So if you want to review the batch jobs, just also look at what's the purpose, and if some customer, for example, is not using the automatic role assignment today, it might be the case that they want to use it in the future. So in that case, it would be better to set it to a withholding state instead of just deleting it and let the customer swim when they want to implement new features.
Right.
So. Did we cover all the mistakes? No, for sure not. But we wanted to list a bit of 10 mistakes. Actually, what we showed today with the dialogue, we got some interactions, and the question from me to Alim would be, Are you already finished with your popcorn, or do you need some more? We're happy to send you more.
And one thing I will say, Andre, is that I actually have a session in not the next session, but the one after about security tips and tricks, and I'll be covering XDS, TPF, data entity security. So some of the stuff that you've talked about as your forgotten features, I'll be bringing up as well.
Perfect.
But yes, let's jump into some questions here.
Okay.
Uh, now,
Thanks, Andre and Alex. It was a great session, and thank you for providing your insights on some of the common mistakes. Specifically, these mistakes happens in each and every projects. Assigning system administration role in crisis or providing extra security. So there are some great questions. One thing from Ian, he agrees with you on providing more access to users. For example, he's giving example of accountant roles, gives access to banking, which is no in his company. Then there is another question from Hitesh about how can we report all activities done by a system administration user?
right. So, Hitesh, that's actually it's kind of funny. I actually wrote a blog on we get this request quite a bit about from customers on trying to report on everything that a sysadmin does. And it's really not possible within AX, within the framework of the AX or the FNO system, simply because normally when you get that request, it's coming from somebody that has a background in SAP or Oracle or some other system where every transaction is tracked and you have this ongoing transactional table that you can report against. AX and FNO don't have that, right? You can do things like the database log or use some sort of like third-party tracking, but at the end of the day, you're only going to be able to really do the best case scenario is to take what we call a risk-based approach to what you're tracking, right? It kind of goes back to that idea of being able to track if a user is making changes to a vendor bank account compared to like a vendor birthday, and basically tracking those areas that you're going to deem to be high risk, because you're not going to be able to track everything in the system. So you want to make sure that you're tracking the areas that actually have an audit requirement for you. So the database log would be Microsoft's example. There are other companies, FastPath is one that has other tracking and reporting solutions. But yeah, you're not going to be able to track everything a sysadmin does. So you got to kind of pick and choose what you'd like to actually capture.
Yes, thank you. Then Ian was talking about the FastPath report on all sysadmin changes that can be sent out regularly on the same note.
Yep.
There is another request from Marco about reviewing the security mistakes from presentation, security mistake number 1 and number 2.
Yeah. I mean, we can jump back. I don't know. Are the slide presentations going to be available to everybody? Because there are some links and stuff in here that you could probably review that in the notes section. That would be useful as well. But mistake number 1 was utilizing out-of-the-box security and kind of the pros and cons of whether you're going to use the security from Microsoft or use the security that you've developed as an overhead there. And then mistake number 2 is where user access is over-provisioned, right? Where because of either utilizing security from Microsoft or simply because determining what security a user needs is difficult, that you're assigning them more access than they need. So those are the 2 basic ideas of slides 1 and 2.
Thanks, Alex. So there is another question from Ina about where I can learn more about how security roles impact yearly or recurring licensing costs.
Yeah, in fact, that's a hard question. If you look at the standard Microsoft tooling, today it's not a perfect world in there. Alex is regularly writing about a kind of new report Microsoft wants to introduce to provide insights what user is currently having what access and then also what license requirements. But then again, if you look at creating new roles or modifying existing roles or after you went live, and then also have some requests for changing the roles. At time of changing the roles, you don't have a clear insight what would be the impact. So if you have, for example, an financial accountant, and you provide access to the released products, for example, then it might be the case that they also require an additional attached supply chain management license. And for that part area, then Alex is working for a company, Fastpath. They do have some better insight for that, and also at To Increase we have a solution which will provide some more insights before you run the yearly report and find out that you have to pay a bit more on your licenses.
Yeah. I would just add to that, like there are free resources, like Andre mentioned, I write about it. Andre has some licensing posts as well. So there are resources out there, but if you do want automated tools, that's where, To Increase or FastPath or another solution would come in, because the tooling from Microsoft or the reports available from Microsoft are not adequate, in my opinion, currently to be able to go in and actually determine why or what licenses the user needs first off, and then secondly, why they need that license, right? So that's the follow-up question.
So there is another question from David about what are the best security models from Azure Active Directory to Power Platform to finance and operations for all users in an organization? Any hints on that?
That is a large question, David, because each of those systems, unfortunately, use their own type of security, right? Or have their own security model. You have F&O that uses X++ security with, role duty privileges. You have Power Platform, which uses XRM security, which is the old CRM style, where you have privileges and business units, and objects can have different access types to what users in the organization can see. And then AAD uses a very simple either group or role access, right? So not all three of those have different security models within them. There isn't anything that you're going to be able to do to unify those across everything. There are certain things that Microsoft is working towards, I know, to help with the assignment of the security, but I believe the security themselves are going to stay within each system, unless, Andre, you've heard different from that.
No, I have not heard anything beyond what you said.
Yeah, so I guess the only hint I would give would be to make sure that the mistakes that we talked about today, a lot of them apply to other systems as well. So they're not just F&O or AX, right? They're going to be the same security mistakes are going to occur on the Power Platform or AAD. The one thing I will say is that you also don't want to look at security within like a silo. And by that, I mean that you can't just look and say, well, my F&O or AX system or dynamic system, whatever it is secure. Therefore, I'm okay. Because now with all of the different, offerings that Microsoft has, your data is going back and forth between these very regularly. So you want to make sure that you're looking and reviewing your security across those applications. Because if you're just looking within one application, you're going to be missing things that are going, either outgoing or incoming into your systems.
All right, thanks, Alex. There is another question from Fade about, where a developer does a piece of development work for any organizations. How do we know if the developer has followed best practices in terms of security impact on the system?
Yeah, that is a tough one, because there's two parts to that, really, right? There's the part where you want them to follow best practice from a ALM perspective, but then also want to follow your best practice as far as your security side. The ALM side is a little bit more doable, or I guess is easier to implement, because you have things like Azure DevOps, you have source control, right? You can follow those. The best practice from the security impact, or what the impact of that security is, that is going to have to be an external process. Or again, you could try another third-party solution, To Increase, FastPath, whatever, to help you, to give you that insight to see what that impact would be. So there isn't anything from Microsoft specifically that's going to say this developer created this role and it's going to cause this risk right at the design time or when they're developing it. So there has to be some sort of review before that goes live to actually say, okay, and that's where that, testing that Andre kind of talked about earlier comes into play, where you're testing in your dev and your UAT, QA before it gets into your production instance and actually causes a problem.
Yeah, and one example here, if you create, for example, a new duty in the system for accessing vendor bank accounts, if you implement that new security in your production environment, you will have to manually verify if you implemented the segregation of duties, if that duty also needs to be added to that list of risks. So that's sometimes it's really not even possible to really check everything on the development side.
Right. Thanks, Andre. Thanks, Alex. There is another question from Anita about, in case of future, past, and current security access, how do we set the time frame to bring this access to the roles?
The question is the time frame. What is a current, what is a future and past record? That depends on the data effective framework from Microsoft on the tables itself, and it's looking really at the today's date and time. So everything, if you say, well, a position is valid starting from the 1st of February, in that case, it's a future record because it's still January. But if it should start in December and it's valid until next year, then it's a current one. So that's based on the date framework from Microsoft.
There is another question from Iltifa about, can we apply the security at field level?
Yes. Yeah. So we didn't get into it, but yes, there is field level security. Andre and I, again, have blogs on this. But if you have questions, they can reach out after.
Yeah, there are also some caveats on that one. And that's so if you have any issues, just ask a question on the Dynamics community or send an email to me or Alex, and we are happy to help out.
There is another question from Juan about security development tool. Is there any security development tool available for finance and operations similar to AX2012?
No. There's,
so
in fact not. But.
Yeah, Andre, I will. Juan, you should attend my next session because I've been working on a project that actually will mimic that to a point. So Andre is completely correct that there is nothing out of the box or currently available, but there is some development on a project that I'm working on about it. So if you want to stick around for that session, I can go into that a little bit more in detail.
There is another question from Irtifa about mobile app. So does mobile app use the same securities in finance and operations?
The question is, what exact mobile app are they referring to? If you look at the warehouse management device, then it's licensed with a device user. But if you are referring to the mobile platform where you can publish mobile workspaces, in that case, you have to assign at least security roles, including data entities. But data entities assignment alone is not working because it does not recognize any table access. So you also have to assign the security roles, which includes access to the menu items. So it will know which table access. And if you assign the roles with the duties and privileges, in that case, they indeed are also licensed like they were a normal user in finance operations itself.
Mm-hmm. So there is one more question, and this is the last one. So we have a lot of questions. This is from Ian about, at the moment, our user conflicts counts double up because it counts not only our company, but Contoso too. Yeah. Is it prudent to delete the demo company on our production instance?
Sorry, a demo company on production?
That would be a security mistake, Andre, in my mind.
That's an implementation mistake. Yes, there should not be a demo company in a production instance.
So the short answer is yes. Yeah. I would remove the demo company from your production instance. That would be the short answer.
All right. That was the last questions, and we are right on the time. So perfect. Thank you, Andre and Alex, for your great sessions and providing insights on security mistakes and answering all these questions. It was a great session. So Our next in line is Nathan Klaus. He's going to share his session about OData and customer high performance integrations using custom apps. He has been very active on the community, sharing his thoughts through the blog series. He has recently written a blog series on OData. So Nathan, are you on?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, we can. The floor is yours, Nathan.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Make sure